William Frawley? What's the matter? Can't you handle it by yourself? No, I can't handle it by myself. We go forward. Okay, are you ready? Yeah. She made America laugh as Ethel Mertz on I Love Lucy. But behind the cameras, Vivian Vance was quietly seething. Her dislike for co-star William Frawley wasn't just a rumor, it was real. Why did she truly despise the man millions thought was her perfect comedic partner? And do you know, to this day, some people still think of me as Mrs. Fred Mertz. Join us as we uncover the real reason behind Vivian Vance's long-standing hatred for William Frawley. Vivian Vance. Vivian Vance was born on July 26, 1909, in Cherryvale, Kansas. She was the second of 6 children in her family. Her birth name was Vivian Roberta Jones. Even from a young age, she showed signs of being a performer. As a child, she loved music and acting, and she participated in school plays and local performances. However, her road to stardom was not smooth. Vivian's relationship with her family, especially her mother, was difficult. Her mother reportedly disapproved of her ambitions and thought performing was not a proper path for a young woman. But Vivian didn't let that stop her. She pushed forward, moving to Albuquerque, New Mexico, in her early 20s. There, she began working seriously in regional theater and took acting lessons while performing in local productions. Eventually, she made her way to New York City. It was there that she truly began to shine. Vivian performed in several Broadway shows in the 1930s and 1940s. Some of her notable appearances included The Voice of the Turtle, Skylark, and Hooray for What. Her talent was evident. She had a strong stage presence, great comedic timing, and a voice that suited musical theater well. Although she found success on stage, her transition to television didn't happen right away. For many years, she stayed mostly in theater. But all of that changed when she was introduced to a role that would define her career forever. Ethel Mertz on I Love Lucy. I Love Lucy. Vivian Vance's casting in I Love Lucy happened somewhat unexpectedly. At the time, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were preparing to launch the show that would become a cultural phenomenon. They needed someone to play Lucy's best friend and neighbor, Ethel Mertz. It had to be someone funny, likable, and able to hold her own next to Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball had a big say in the casting. When she met Vivian Vance, she saw something special. Even though others questioned the choice, thinking Vance might be too glamorous or too young, Lucille insisted she was right for the part. Vance won the role, and the two quickly built a close personal and professional bond. On I Love Lucy, Vivian played Ethel Mertz, the loyal but sharp-witted friend of Lucille Ricardo. Her on-screen husband, Fred Mertz, was played by William Frawley. The Mertzes were landlords to the Ricardos and often found themselves pulled into Lucy's wild plans and antics. Ethel was usually the voice of reason, but not always. Sometimes she jumped into Lucy's schemes and added her own twist. Vivian's performance as Ethel Mertz struck a chord with audiences. She was relatable, funny, and down-to-earth. While Lucy was the wild dreamer, Ethel was the grounded, practical friend who still had her own sense of humor and spunk. This balance made their scenes together memorable and created some of the show's most iconic moments. In the scenes, Lucille Ball and Vivian Vance developed a genuine friendship. They trusted each other, supported each other, and had real chemistry that came through on screen. That connection helped make their performances stronger. Fans loved their dynamic, and their bond became one of the emotional pillars of the show. Vivian Vance became a household name. I Love Lucy was a massive hit and changed television history. But while it gave Vance fame, it also brought challenges, personal life, and struggles. Vivian Vance's personal life was not as joyful as her on-screen performances. She was married 4 times, and many of those relationships were difficult or short-lived. Her marriages often ended in heartbreak or disappointment, which took a toll on her emotional being. Vance also struggled with mental health problems. She dealt with depression throughout her life, something that wasn't often discussed openly in those times. The pressure of fame, personal issues, and the demands of the entertainment industry added to her stress. There was also the issue of public perception. On television, Vance played a character who was older, less attractive, and less glamorous than she was in real life. Ethel Mertz was written as a frumpy, middle-aged housewife, even though Vance was still in her early 40s when the show began. This affected how people saw her off-screen. Vivian was very aware of this image. It bothered her that the public began to associate her with Ethel so closely that they couldn't separate the character from the real person. In Hollywood, where appearance and youth often played a big role in casting, this was a serious concern. She felt that the role, while successful, might have hurt her chances of getting more varied and serious work later on. Despite the difficulties, Vance remained a strong performer. She didn't let her struggles show on camera, and she always gave her best in every scene. After I Love, Lucy ended, Vivian Vance found it hard to escape the shadow of Ethel Mertz. She continued to work in television, appearing on The Lucy Show for several seasons. However, she was never able to fully break away from the character that had made her famous. Vance wanted to take on more serious roles. She wanted to do drama, maybe even return to the stage full-time. But casting directors and producers often saw her only as Ethel. The public expected her to be funny, plain, and always second to the star. This was frustrating for someone who had much more to offer. She also felt that her looks were being used against her. While Lucille Ball was allowed to stay glamorous and central to the story, Vance was pushed into being the funny friend, who didn't get to shine in the same way. In interviews, Vance admitted that this bothered her deeply. She wanted recognition not just as a sidekick, but as a real actress with range and depth. Still, she kept working. She did guest appearances on other TV shows, stage performances, and even a few small film roles. But nothing ever reached the level of her success on I Love Lucy. Later in life, Vivian Vance moved to Connecticut with her final husband, John Dodds. She lived a quieter life away from the spotlight and focused on her health and well-being. Sadly, she was diagnosed with breast cancer in the late 1970s. She passed away in 1979 at the age of 70. Vivian Vance gave television one of its most iconic characters, but her journey was filled with personal battles, big dreams, and moments of deep frustration. Up next, we'll take a closer look at William Frawley, the man who played her on-screen husband, and find out why things got so tense between them off-camera. William Frawley was born on February 26, 1887, in Burlington, Iowa. He grew up in a working-class Irish Catholic family and attended local schools. From an early age, he showed interest in entertainment, but it wasn't clear that acting would become his full-time career. Before he entered show business, Frawley worked several ordinary jobs, including as a court reporter and stenographer. However, performing always pulled him in. In his early 20s, Frawley found his way into the world of vaudeville. Vaudeville was a popular form of live entertainment that included comedy, music, and variety acts. He teamed up with his brother for a short time, performing comedy skits and songs. Eventually, he began performing solo, and later partnered with pianist and actress Edna Louise Brulette, whom he briefly married in 1914. The marriage didn't last, but his love for the stage did. Frawley also began writing and performing his own musical material. He was known for his comedic timing, sharp wit, and his ability to work a crowd. His success in vaudeville led him to more stage work, and by the 1920s and 1930s, he was appearing in Broadway productions and gaining more recognition. The stage success helped him make the leap to Hollywood. In the early 1930s, Frawley began working in films, just as the movie industry was growing fast. He quickly became a reliable character actor, someone who didn't usually play the lead role but who added depth and color to a story. With his gravelly voice, stocky build, and no-nonsense style, Frawley was perfect for playing tough guys, grumpy sidekicks, and streetwise friends. By the time I Love Lucy came along, William Frawley had already appeared in over 100 films. His film career included roles in classics like Miracle on 34th Street, where he played a political advisor, and Going My Way, where he appeared alongside Bing Crosby. He wasn't usually the star, but he was always a solid presence, dependable, experienced, and often scene-stealing. Despite his success in movies, by the late 1940s, his career had slowed down. Hollywood producers had started to see him as a difficult actor, mainly because of his well-known drinking problem and temper. Many studios were hesitant to hire him because he had a reputation for being unpredictable, especially if alcohol was involved. Still, when Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball were casting for I Love Lucy in 1951, Frawley saw an opportunity. He heard about the show and wanted the part of Fred Mertz, the penny-pinching, grumpy but lovable landlord who would be married to Vivian Vance's character Ethel. Frawley thought he was perfect for the role, and he contacted Desi Arnaz directly to ask for an audition. At first, the show's producers were unsure. They knew Frawley's history, and they worried that his drinking could create problems on set. But Desi Arnaz was willing to give him a chance. Arnaz laid down a strict rule. If Frawley ever missed a day of work or showed up drunk, he'd be fired immediately. Frawley agreed. To everyone's surprise, Frawley showed up on time and stayed professional. He knew this was his last big shot, and he didn't want to mess it up. He took the role of Fred Mertz and made it his own. His deadpan delivery, sarcastic humor, and chemistry with the rest of the cast made him a fan favorite. Fred Mertz became one of the most recognizable TV characters of the 1950s. Notorious drinking habits and decline. William Frawley was a lifelong bachelor. He never remarried after his brief marriage in the early 1900s. He was known to be very private about his personal life, and many details about his relationships, if he had any, were kept out of the public eye. He lived alone, and much of his life revolved around his work and his habits. One of the most talked about aspects of Frawley's life was his drinking. He had a long-standing problem with alcohol, which had caused him trouble throughout his career. During his time in Hollywood before I Love Lucy, several studios had reportedly stopped hiring him because of his behavior. There were stories of him getting into fights, being late to sets, and being difficult to work with, usually due to drinking. It's important to note, however, that during I Love Lucy, Frawley was reportedly very professional. He didn't drink on set, and he followed the rules Desi Arnaz had put in place. He did, however, continue drinking in his personal time. He was often seen at bars, and he had a routine of spending his evenings drinking alone or with friends. His drinking problem likely affected his relationships off-screen, too. He didn't maintain close friendships with many cast members. He had a famously bad relationship with Vivian Vance, and he wasn't known for being warm or friendly. Still, he was respected by some of his peers for his talent and old-school work ethic. After I Love Lucy ended in 1957, Frawley found new work fairly quickly. In 1960, he joined the cast of My Three Sons, a family sitcom starring Fred MacMurray. On the show, Frawley played Bob O'Casey, the boy's grandfather and caretaker. Once again, he brought his gruff charm to the role and became a popular part of the series. Frawley stayed on My Three Sons for 5 seasons. However, his health began to decline. Years of drinking and aging took a toll on his body. He began forgetting lines, moving slower, and showing signs of fatigue. In 1965, he left the show due to health concerns and was replaced by actor William Demarest. And not long after leaving the series, Frawley's health continued to get worse. He suffered from heart problems and other age-related issues. On March 3, 1966, just a week after his 79th birthday, William Frawley collapsed on a sidewalk in Hollywood after watching a movie at a theater. He was taken to the hospital but was pronounced dead shortly after from a heart attack. His death was met with mixed reactions. While many in the industry respected his long career and dedication to acting, others remembered him more for his difficult personality and conflicts with co-stars, especially Vivian Vance. Despite his flaws, William Frawley left a lasting impact on television history. His role as Fred Mertz became part of American pop culture, and his work helped shape the early days of TV comedy. He may not have been a perfect man, but he was a memorable performer who gave life to one of TV's most iconic characters. William Frawley's story was one of talent, trouble, and a second chance that paid off in a big way. Next up, we'll dive into the behind-the-scenes drama and explore why Vivian Vance and William Frawley just couldn't stand each other. Behind the scenes, Few When I Love. Lucy began filming in 1951. Vivian Vance and William Frawley were just two working actors brought together to play a married couple. At first, their relationship was reportedly civil. They didn't know each other before the show, and both were experienced professionals. According to Greg Oppenheimer, the son of the show's producer, Jess Oppenheimer, they even got along quite well at first. But it didn't take long for things to start going downhill. One of the earliest sources of tension was Vance's discomfort with the casting decision. She was in her early 40s when the show began. Frawley, on the other hand, was in his mid-60s. That meant a more than 20-year age gap between them. To make things more difficult, the script treated Fred and Ethel as a long-married average couple with little mention of any age difference. Vance thought it was hard to believe that the audience would accept them as a married pair. She reportedly said, "No one will believe I'm married to that old coot." This statement got back to Frawley, and he did not take it well. Frawley was known for having a short temper and didn't appreciate criticism, especially from younger actresses. When he heard Vance's remarks, it deeply offended him. He didn't hide his frustration and started making comments about Vance in return. Over time, these early disagreements turned into something more serious. Frawley would mock Vance behind her back, calling her unflattering names and criticizing her abilities. One of his early complaints was that she couldn't sing well and had no business offering input during musical scenes. He also disliked how she sometimes tried to give suggestions on their dance numbers. Frawley thought she was overstepping her role, and this made him even more resentful. Meanwhile, Vance became more and more irritated by his attitude. The tension between them grew, and their relationship quickly shifted from being polite co-workers to becoming bitter rivals. "I told him to meet us at the American Express office." That was clever. Hello. Their feud wasn't just about casting. It was about image, pride, and the struggle for respect in a fast-changing industry. As the seasons went on, the tension between Vance and Frawley turned into a full-blown insult war. While they still acted professionally during tapings, they often traded sarcastic remarks off-screen and even sometimes on camera, hidden as jokes in the script. Vivian Vance started making jabs by calling Frawley Old Fat Freddy. This nickname stuck around in backstage conversations and was sometimes slipped into her delivery on the show. Frawley hit back hard. According to sources, he once suggested that Ethel be described in the script as having a figure like a sack of doorknobs. It was a mean-spirited way to insult Vance's appearance. These kinds of insults became routine. Frawley would go out of his way to come up with cruel one-liners. Vance responded in kind. Neither one held back when it came to criticizing the other. Their arguments weren't just private. They sometimes affected the atmosphere on set, although they didn't let their feud ruin scenes or cause production delays. Their co-stars and crew could sense the hostility. Interestingly, the writers sometimes played along. They would include lines that allowed Fred and Ethel to insult each other, which gave both actors a chance to vent their real-life frustrations through the characters. In a way, their real conflict added another layer to the on-screen relationship between Fred and Ethel, making their bickering feel even more believable. Despite their issues, both actors stayed on the show for the entire run. Neither one ever walked away, and both understood the importance of professionalism. But their hatred for each other never faded. After I Love Lucy ended, the studio considered several options to keep the momentum going. One idea was to create a spin-off series focused on Fred and Ethel Mertz. The concept made sense, the characters were popular, and a show centered around them could easily bring in viewers. William Frawley was very open to the idea. He liked playing Fred, and was ready to continue working. Vivian Vance, however, shut the idea down immediately. She wanted nothing to do with Frawley beyond the original series. She also didn't want to continue playing Ethel. Vance was already struggling with being typecast, and the idea of spending more years acting as Fred Mertz's wife was unappealing to her. When she learned about the proposed spin-off, she turned it down flat, even though it would have come with a generous paycheck. Her decision deeply angered Frawley. He felt betrayed and insulted. To him, the rejection wasn't just about the show, it was personal. He thought Vance was standing in the way of a good opportunity out of pure spite. According to some reports, he never forgave her for it. He reportedly made nasty comments about her in public for years afterward. The show's producer, Desi Arnaz, found himself in the middle. He had vouched for Frawley and supported Vance, and now he had to manage their rivalry. Arnaz handled the situation carefully. He respected both actors, but knew they would never work together again. So he left the idea of the spin-off behind and focused on new projects with Lucille Ball. Their feud became legendary in Hollywood. Other actors and crew members often commented on how intense the dislike was. It was no secret in the industry. In years after I Love Lucille had ended, the bitterness between them was still fresh. Vivian Vance and William Frawley played one of TV's most memorable couples, but off-screen, they could barely stand to be in the same room. A different narrative. Vivian Vance and William Frawley will always be remembered as Fred and Ethel Mertz, the lovable, bickering couple who lived next door to Lucille and Ricky Ricardo on I Love Lucille. But behind the scenes, their relationship was nothing like the one viewers saw on screen. Their personal feud became one of the most talked-about conflicts in classic TV history. Yet even now, there are mixed stories about what really happened and who was truly to blame. This section explores the different sides of the story, what people close to them had to say, and how their rivalry became part of their legacy. For decades, fans and insiders have debated whether the feud between Vivian Vance and William Frawley was mutual or mostly one-sided. Some say both actors hated each other equally, while others argue that one of them took it more personally than the other. One of the most revealing voices in this conversation is Desi Arnaz, who not only played Ricky Ricardo on the show, but also served as one of its producers. In his memoir, A Book, Arnaz wrote that the hostility mainly came from Frawley. According to Arnaz, William Frawley had a problem with Vivian Vance from the very beginning. Right after she was cast as Ethel, Frawley reportedly said, "Where the hell did you find this bit? She can't sing worth a damn. She bugs me." That kind of language shows that Frawley formed a negative opinion of Vance almost immediately and wasn't afraid to share it with others. Frawley didn't stop there. He continued to criticize Vance's singing, her dancing, and even the way she carried herself on set. He seemed to think she was arrogant, even though Vance was known for being a hard-working actress who took her role seriously. He reportedly didn't like how she occasionally offered direction during scenes involving music or choreography, something he thought was not her place to do. Others on the set, however, said the dislike ran both ways. Greg Oppenheimer, whose father, Jess, was the producer of I Love Lucy, noted that Vance was upset that people believed she could be married to someone so much older. She once complained that, "No one will believe I'm married to that old coot." When Frawley heard this, it triggered an ongoing back and forth of insults that never really died down. But then there's the version where Vance didn't hate Frawley at all. In fact, according to Desi Arnaz, she never felt any animosity toward him. That's a surprising twist, especially considering all the biting comments Vance made about Frawley during their years on the show. Could it be that her sarcastic remarks were just part of her humor? Or was she trying to hide deeper frustrations? This mix of opinions makes the truth harder to pin down. Some say Frawley was the real aggressor, while others claim Vance gave as good as she got. In reality, it's likely that both actors had strong feelings about each other and neither was willing to back down. Final years and reconciliation. One thing is clear, there was never any public reconciliation between Vivian Vance and William Frawley. Their feud did not mellow with time. In fact, Frawley continued making rude and cruel comments about Vance until the end of his life. One of the most striking examples of this came years later, when Frawley was working on the show My Three Sons. Actor Tim Considine, who worked with Frawley on that show, shared an eye-opening story. During a visit from a lieutenant general and his adjutant, one of the guests asked Frawley what Vivian Vance was really like. Without hesitation, Frawley replied by calling her a miserable sow. The comment shocked everyone on set, especially given the formal nature of the visit. It showed just how deeply Frawley held on to his bitterness toward Vance. This kind of language wasn't just unkind, it revealed how little had changed between the two actors over the years. Even after I Love Lucy ended and they were no longer working together, Frawley couldn't let go of his resentment. When William Frawley died in March 1966, Vivian Vance's reaction was equally memorable and controversial. She was at a dinner party when she received the news. According to reports, she raised a glass and said, "Champagne for everybody." Whether the story is completely true or slightly exaggerated, it reflects the long-standing anger she held toward him. There is no record of Vance ever making a public statement of grief or tribute after Frawley's death. She didn't speak kindly of him in interviews, and there was no sign that they had ever made peace privately. For both actors, the feud seemed to last until the very end. It's important to remember that neither of them was perfect. Frawley's bitterness and cruel remarks certainly added fuel to the fire. At the same time, Vance's own comments about Frawley's age and appearance likely caused real offense. The feud may not have been balanced in intensity at all times, but it definitely wasn't a one-sided story. One of the most surprising things about the feud between Vivian Vance and William Frawley is how well they hid it from the public during the show's original run. When I Love Lucy, Fred and Ethel Mertz were a believable couple. Their constant bickering was funny, familiar, and part of what made the show work so well. Audiences loved them and never suspected that the actors playing them couldn't stand each other in real life. It wasn't until years later, as behind-the-scenes stories began to surface, that fans learned the truth. For many viewers, the revelation was shocking. How could two people who seem to have such great chemistry on screen actually be enemies? The truth made fans look at the show in a new way. Some even argue that their real-life animosity made the characters more believable. Because Fred and Ethel often argued on the show, the tension between Vance and Frawley may have actually added authenticity to their performances. Their sharp exchanges, sarcastic remarks, and eye rolls came across as very real because in many ways they were. Today, their feud is remembered as a part of classic TV lore. It adds a dramatic layer to the history of I Love Lucy, reminding us that what we see on screen doesn't always match what happens behind the scenes. For fans and historians alike, it's a reminder that every beloved show has its share of secrets. If you enjoyed this video on classic TV history, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe for more, and let us know in the comments whose side are you on, Vivian's or William's.